Hello, this is Andrew Steck from Hearing is Healing Christian Counseling, and we are going to look at activation and the window of tolerance. And this is a second video in a five-part series on Christian listening skills. And so we're going to look at the window of tolerance and activation and just do an introduction to what that is. But we're also going to be weaving in Christian integration of listening skills and how listening as a skill in mental health can be used along with and in the midst of the window of tolerance and activation. So that's what we're going to be looking at here. So to understand the window of tolerance, we need to understand a little bit about trauma. And so when we talk about trauma, there's really two types of trauma. We oftentimes call them big T traumas and small T traumas. So a big T trauma would be something where your nervous system believed that you were going to possibly die, or sexual assault is another form of big T trauma. And so that can happen oftentimes, like with post-traumatic stress disorder. You were part of an event where that happened, or it also could happen. You can have trauma in, vicariously hearing about someone else, like a loved one where something happened, or witnessing it. That also can be how you can have those big T traumas. But there's also small T traumas. And so small T traumas are things that stay with our nervous system and stay with our beliefs that people grow up with, that have to do with like developmental beliefs, or these are things that maybe in the moment they were really hard for us, but they don't stay with our nervous system the same way where a big T trauma is. In other words, it didn't have the threat of death or sexual assault with it. And that's not, I mean, there's a lot more too big and T, too small T and big T traumas, but that is, one way to look at it. So when we are looking at trauma and the window of tolerance, it's good to have a definition that trauma really is a biological need for calm. So when we go through, especially the big T traumas, but also some of the small T traumas, our nervous system has a lack of calm. So trauma creates observable changes to the brain, which make an individual more likely to be depressed or anxious. And understanding the triggers of the things that cause us to feel that way is important. So let's say, as let's say someone, when they were 7 years old, they lived next to an old lady who, let's say the 7-year-old liked to play baseball, friends out in the front yard. And if they would even go next to her lawn, this old lady would come out and yell at them and say, "Make sure you're staying off my lawn," and would basically scare the heebie-jeebies out of these little kids. So let's say that's the scenario. So that's a 7-year-old. Now they're 37, and at work, any of their coworkers that are elderly women, when they are around them, they find that their shoulders are tense. They find just an aversion, like I just would rather, you're not the type of person I want to share my lunch break with. And it could be that these are really sweet, nice people. And so the way that trauma stays with us is it causes activation, or it causes energy in our body to be high when we witness triggers. Um, so increased cortisol levels, when people have gone through trauma, increased cortisol levels leave individuals in a constant state of alert. The example I just gave was a small T trauma. So that's not a constant state of alert. In other words, that person doesn't have PTSD, or they don't have, likely they don't have life interfering trauma, but they still have trauma. There's still a story that is stuck with their body. And by listening to the energy in the body, which we call activation, that can help us understand what's going on, and it can be part of the solution too. So I have one more note here, that people often feel stuck in emotions of past trauma, especially in a state of physical activation. So we just gave an example of a small T trauma. Let's say the big T trauma is something like a car crash. Someone is in a car crash, and they end up in the hospital. They don't die, but their nervous system is storing that event as big T trauma. So in that instance, that person still has the triggers of maybe when they get in the car, they find themselves going into panic attacks. They find their breathing gets short, and just the thought of being in cars, it just creates incredible panic. So there's activation or energy in the body that is there. But you also, with that level of trauma, with the big T traumas, people can feel stuck in emotions from the past. Um, so it might not just be with the triggers, um, or maybe it is a trigger of thinking about a car, but then you can just feel stuck in it for hours or days, and it really can be life interfering. All right, so let's look at what the window of tolerance is and look more at activation. So the window of tolerance was originally coined by Dr. Daniel Siegel, and it describes the optimal zone where people can handle stress and function optimally. So the window of tolerance is a measuring tool that we use to rate when our activation is in this optimal zone. And so activation is the energy experienced in the body at any time. So we can just look at the other slide here. So the way that we measure activation is 0 to 3 to 0 to -3. And that would be in the window of tolerance. So activation is the energy in the body. So if I let's say I'm at something I'm really comfortable doing. So uh, recently, at the end of the day, something that I have been doing for fun is watching old poker matches. So I like to watch different seasons where I like to watch different things, but that's what I've been doing for fun the last few months. And if I'm watching that, I scan the energy in my body, I notice that that's an event, something I can do where it just brings me low in the window of tolerance, or it brings my activation or the energy in my body low. So I'm also a basketball fan. And if I'm watching a basketball game, and we're using all positive things here, like emotions that people, like and enjoy. So if I'm watching basketball, and let's say the team I'm cheering for is they were losing by 4 points, and then they hit a three-pointer, and then they played the defense and they got the ball again and they score, so now they're up by 1 point. I might notice my body is tense, and my hands might be gripped as I'm watching it. Let's say my team scores, I might throw my hands up like that without thinking about it. So there's this energy that's in the body. So this energy can be things like anxiety. Anxiety causes, we call it the sympathetic system, causes the energy in our body to go up. Or it could be things like peace and relaxation. So if I'm, at the end of the day, I'm watching poker games from 10 years ago, um, it causes my activation to go down. It's a restful, relaxing pastime for me. So you can have also, like, let's say someone is struggling with the thought that they're not good enough. So I'm having a thought I'm not good enough, and the energy in my body goes down, and I'm actually feeling depressed. I'm feeling like I'm actually having depression symptoms. So activation can be, negative emotions like depression. It can be negative emotions like anxiety, but we can measure it -3 to +3. And as long as we're in that zone, the energy in our body is in that zone, we can know it, that's where we are, because we're going to feel present still. We're going to be curious. We're going to be, thoughts are in flow. The examples I just gave, those are both things that, watching basketball or watching poker, that's a pastime I'm doing by myself. But a lot of times the window of tolerance has to do with how we're able to be socially engaged with others. So when we are in our window of tolerance, we are able to be socially engaged, and we're actually hearing the person we're talking to, and we're really hearing where they're coming from. We're able to feel like our listening and our seeing and our talking skills are online. When we're out of the window of tolerance, meaning our activation is higher than +3 or lower than -3, our brain starts to go offline. Our social part of our brain goes offline, and we're not able to be our best version of ourselves socially. So other parts of being in that window of tolerance is our body might feel relaxed. That's really what we're looking at is what do I notice in my body? That's how I know where I am in my window of tolerance. And it will, of course, be affected by the situation we're in and the thoughts we're having about that. But it's really what's going on in our body. So our body feels relaxed in that place. Uh, we're able to emotionally regulate. We feel grounded. We're interested in others. So that's when we're in the window of tolerance. So if we're out of the window of tolerance and we're on the high end, we might have thoughts that are racing, anxiety or anger. There might be chest tightness, might have palms that are sweaty, pupils are small, muscles are tight. And there's going to be this fight or this flight response. So, what's really important is to know that when someone's out of the window of tolerance, they normally do not know that they're out of the window of tolerance. Even um, as a therapist, as I'm tracking this with people and we're talking about, hey, how did the last week go? And they're telling me, hey, this is the event that happened. And they'll describe something. And if I'll ask, yeah, do you think where were you in the window of tolerance? It's very normal for someone to say, oh, I was in the window of tolerance. And then as we talk about it, 5 minutes later for that person to go, you know what, I was definitely out of the window of tolerance. So even the point is even when you learn the skill of tracking where you are in the window of tolerance, it's can be difficult to know when you're out of the window. There's something about fight or flight, especially that makes us believe, especially if we're in fight. Um, we're in a fight mode of thinking, if I'm in an argument with someone, I'm convinced I'm right, they're wrong. And I know that this isn't about me. I'm not out of my window of tolerance. So that can be important. Also, we might feel like a triggered child version of ourselves. So that would be the place of I was really scared and I felt like that helpless 7-year-old, or I felt like that helpless 4-year-old or that helpless 12-year-old. Or we might feel kind of like sometimes people talk about a teenage want to fight and argue with everyone. They might have that kind of version of ourselves. So that's when our activation or the energy in our body is high. So +3, +4, +5, that whole realm. I one time heard it described that at +4, that's where our stomach shuts off. And yes, we can make ourselves eat, but I really don't want to eat. Like the thought of, hey, do I want to eat this food? It's like, no, I don't want to eat that. I'm triggered. I'm feeling anxiety. I'm feeling activation. So 0, -1, -2, all the way up to -3. That's an okay place to be. You're still in the window of tolerance. It could be actually a really good place to be. But once we get to -3 and -4, -5, that realm, anything above -3 would be out of the window of tolerance. With hypoarousal. So this would be where our thoughts feel slow, feels like we're kind of stuck in molasses. A lot of times people might feel depressed or unmotivated. There might be a sense of shame or withdrawal. Body might feel heavy, numb, paralyzed. So that's when you're out of the window of tolerance. So again, the social engagement system is another word for the window of tolerance. So when you're in the window, uh, I see, if I'm talking to someone, I see you rather than my past trauma. When I'm outside my window of tolerance, I project past trauma into the present. So this is where relationships, whether it's with a partner or relationship with a friend or even an acquaintance, this is where the knowing and tracking your window of tolerance becomes really important, because a lot of times when we start having conflict with others, the conflict moves us out of the window. In other words, the activation or energy in our body goes low and we kind of go, I just kind of can't think anymore. Or it goes high and I perceive you as the problem, rather than you as someone who I'm trying to solve this with. And when that happens, when we're out of the window, we start projecting all of our past trauma onto the now. In other words, it feels like whatever my trauma is, it feels like it's going on right now without me having a memory of it. So if I was a picked on, bullied kid, it's going to feel like that person I'm having an argument with or disagrees with me or whatever the conflict is. It's going to feel like I'm that kid. And so if I escaped conflict as a kid by just going, and we call it parasympathetic, or the system that goes low, 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 and it brings me all the way down. Another phrase we have is dorsal vagal, can bring us low, low, low. We might have like a submit response. So this would be the response, like if a cat was chasing a rabbit, if that cat catches that rabbit, the rabbit actually plays dead. And the reason it does that, we call it the submit response. The reason it does that is that's the best chance that that animal, that rabbit, has of escaping that situation. And so if my trauma from my past of being bullied, if that's what the trauma is to just kind of go low and let people, push me around or whatever it is, that might be how my nervous system tries to get out of that. So I find myself, my brain just kind of going offline, um, and I can't find my words, and I kind of look at the situation afterwards, going, what happened to myself? How come I wasn't able to think clearly about the situation? And so relationships, husband and wife, she might just kind of just move to this place, or he might move to this place of, I don't know, my brain just kind of goes offline when we get into conflict. The other thing, and this one is, happens probably a little bit more, is in conflict, people go high in the window of tolerance. The energy in their body or their activation goes up, and they go to fight, flight, or freeze. So either I have a lot of energy, I can feel it in my body, and I just want to get out. I want to avoid, so it's still an avoidance, but it's because my activation is high, or I perceive you as the problem and I'm in fight mode and I want to tell you what's right. And this is where we have two people using just logic rather than emotionally connecting with one another. We're fighting back and forth. I'm right about this. No, I'm right. So that's that fight mode. Or you might go to freeze mode. So freeze is still high energy in the body. So again, that is chasing the rabbit, and the rabbit just freezes to try to stay safe. And so when there's conflict or there's things where I'm having high activation, my shoulders are tense. I notice that my legs are really tight and I can't think straight and I can't find my words and I'm just kind of frozen. So that's how that works. Again, there's the 5 animal defenses there. And so with the optimal zone, the window of tolerance, we want to learn how to really stay in the window of tolerance. So we want to learn how to track our window. We want to learn how to use resources, which would be skills that have a mental health component to them, that help us when we're low in the window to come back into the window, when we're high in the window to come back into the window, so that we're not in fight, flight, freeze, or submit. And then the other one there is attachment cry. So that would be that rabbit is, stay safe, is actually crying out for their parents. And so attachment cry can have all kinds of, a number of different manifestations in a human. Sometimes, let's say I'm working with someone who has sexual acting out, someone who they really believe. So if we use Christian integration here, they really believe, that sexual purity is really important to them, and whenever they are feeling unsafe, they don't have a lot of awareness to it, but they end up using resources like pornography or things like that. And it's because it's a cry of trying to stay safe. I'm trying to attach with a person, and my brain is being tricked into thinking that the pornography and the acting out with that is connection. Your nervous system thinks I'm connecting with someone. Someone else says, lady says, I really feel like I'm in an argument with my husband and no one really can understand me. And I just find myself lost in these books. And so there's attachment cry. They're trying to connect with kind of pretend things in their mind. But it also could be just this, like you can actually like be trying to attach with someone who but it's coming from a childhood place of abandonment and hurt. So it's not the part of your brain that's the adult self, it's that little kid inside of you that felt like they were abandoned. And so there's really no amount of affirming that someone can do when someone's in that attachment cry part. That individual has to learn to come into their adult self and to come back into the window of tolerance and to see that they're safe. They're not that hurt kid that was abandoned as a child. All right, so how do I stay in my window of tolerance? So we're going to look at the non-Christian integration piece of this, and then in a second we'll look at the Christian integration piece. So we want to identify and use resources that correlate with the need for hypoactivation. So hypo is low. So I'm hypoactivated. We want to find a resource to bring me up. And if I'm hyperactivated, I want to find something that brings me low. I've made the comment with people that when I'm doing trauma work, there's a phase of it where it kind of feels, and a lot of this comes out of sensory motor psychotherapy. But there's a part of it where it kind of feels like I'm almost more of doing like I think of myself almost like, I mean, I'm not, but it feels me as therapist almost like I'm more like a physical therapist or a chiropractor because we're working with the body so much. Because activation really is what are you experiencing in your body. So mindfully tracking where we are in the window of tolerance, it both widens our window and helps us stay in the window. And that the keywords there are mindfully tracking. So if I am going low in the window, I ask the question, where am I in my window and what's telling me that? Well, I'm realizing that my head is kind of drooping, and I realize that I'm having thoughts like I'm not good enough, and uh, it's all futile. It doesn't. Nothing I do is going to make any difference. Life is just I'm trapped. This is hopeless. And as I'm having those thoughts, my eyes are just kind of heavy, and I want to go take a nap. And so understanding what you're feeling in your window or in your body, that's going to help you stay in the window of tolerance. And actually, it actually also widens the window of tolerance. Some people have itty bitty bitty little window of tolerance, meaning it's still 1, 2, 3, negative 1, 2, 3. But on the screen there in the corner, you can see it's very small. And a lot of the time is spent outside of the window. So a lot of my time is plus 3 and -3. So just a lot of zone there um, where I'm mostly low in the window or I'm mostly really activated, where I have a lot of energy in my body and I'm really feeling anxious. So if I can track mindfully, if I can be aware, again, mindfulness is that present tense, non-judgmental, just noticing. So if I can present tense, notice my shoulders being tight, feeling my feet kind of gripping my shoes, noticing my breathing is really tight, or I kind of feel my heart doing this. If I can just notice that. So I kind of move from being involved with everything in life. And it's almost like I sit back on a lawn chair and I observe what's going on with myself in my body. And that observing brain brings us into mindfulness and it widens our window of tolerance and it helps us to stay in the window. And again, this is important because when I'm out of the window of tolerance, I project all my trauma from the past. It feels like it's happening now. So the more I can, and everyone has had some kind of trauma. Everyone's had the sibling who made fun of us and made us feel bad. And so, those would be small T traumas. Or the time where mom and dad, we felt abandoned because of even a misinterpretation, but that kid, the story they were believing was that, mom and dad don't love me and care for me. And so we want to be in the window because then it feels like what's going on, as we're filming this is year 2023. I want to stay in the year 2023. I don't want to go back to those places of childhood wounds because I won't have a memory that tells me I'm out or that I'm in the memory, that I'm in that trauma. I'll just have the feeling. So the feelings come back when we're out of our window. So what am I mindful of? And we're mindful of, we call them in sensory motor psychotherapy, we call them our 5 core organizers, our thoughts and our feelings, but really the ones that are going to help keep us in the window of tolerance are less about the thoughts and the feelings. They're really the body sensations, they're the movement impulses, the little desire to move back, the someone says something and I notice my hand just kind of moves a little bit. Those movement impulses, being aware of that, and then also our five senses. All right, so let's look at some Christian integration ways to stay in our window of tolerance. And Carl Lehman, in the manual approach, and in his book Outsmarting Ourselves, um, or Outsmarting Yourself, as I look to my bookshelf to make sure I'm getting the name right, Carl Lehman talks about the relational circuits of your brain. So he has a little bit of a different model, but when you compare that to Daniel Amen and kind of just the trauma therapy world, it's so clear to see the overlap. And so Carl talks about how when we're hearing God's voice, we need to have the relational circuits of our brain on board. If the relational circuits are not on board, we're not going to be able to hear. So if we go back here, in the window of tolerance model, we have the word social engagement system. And then Carl Lehman calls it the relational circuits of our brain. So really, we're talking about the same thing. And he talks about the cingulate cortex, which we'll look at that when we looked at it at our last video, we referenced it. But very similar here. So what are some things that would bring those relational circuits on board? How can we get the relational circuits of our brain kind of activated and firing so we're in that part of our brain rather than the trauma part of our brain, or the part that would be rejecting things from the past? And so he gives a few different things. So thankfulness, that's the core of his Emmanuel approach skill, is being thankful. When we are thankful, it helps the relational circuits of our brain be online. There's another one of humor. So I will have, if we're working through, lots of trauma, a lot of times I'll have clients tell me about their sense of humor, and then find on their phone three or four, or two, three, four different YouTube videos that they find funny. Everyone's sense of humor is different. But if you can, especially be sharing with someone something that you find funny, and humorous, that's going to be helpful for the relational circuits of your brain being on board. And that's going to help you be in that window of tolerance. Also, attunement. So attunement is feeling heard, feeling seen, and feeling understood. So I'm in relationship with someone and I'm feeling heard, I'm feeling seen, I'm feeling understood. When we're having listening skills, that we're going to go through in our next couple of videos of Emmanuel approach and the 4 keys to hearing God's voice, that's what's happening. Is we're in an interactive relationship, interactive connection with God, where it feels true that he's with me and he hears me and he sees me and he understands me. So if I'm feeling pain, he hears that I'm feeling pain. If I'm in pain, he sees that I'm in pain and he understands it. Or another way to say this, he feels what I'm feeling. And so we can also use that if, or we can come back into the window of tolerance or have our relational circuits of our brain on board when someone else has, the hearing our story, sees us, understands us, and all those things feel true. That's another way to bring our relational circuits online. It can be the hardest one to do because on that one, we're either dependent for other people, or we're using that, from that Christian integration point of view, we're using that with the Lord, but I need my relational circuits online in order to get to that connection. So, and we'll talk about that with the Emmanuel approach. But the other thing would just be calming. So using like a familiar scripture or calming music. And so this is, just calming yourself is another way to turn the relational circuits of your brain on. All right, so past unresolved trauma causes a person to leave the window of tolerance. So the example, if I was bit by a yellow snake when I was in 3rd grade, whenever I see a yellow extension cord, I have this automatic jump. My body has this response. And when that happens, that's that trigger. I'm leaving the window of tolerance. So that's an important piece there too. So ways to resource or come back into the window of tolerance other than hearing God's voice and other. So we talked about mindfully tracking what I'm feeling in the body. We can also use grounding skills. deep breathing, changing your posture based on whether you're high in the window or low in the window, or use movements based on whether we're hypo-aroused or hypo-aroused. So a lot there, but things to explore with a therapist would be, exploring resources around that on how do I bring myself back into the window of tolerance. And then Christian listening skills can be used as a specific tool to help with the window of tolerance and window of tolerance issues or activation issues. So let's look at a few different ways that this can be helpful. Is Christian listening skills help with reoccurring issues that cause triggers. So the example I was giving at the beginning of our video of someone who, when they were 7, neighbor lady yelled at them all the time. Part of their childhood was this lady's always yelling at them for playing baseball in the front yard, and now has triggers to talking to elderly women. I think the example I gave was a 37-year-old who struggles with that. If someone will listen, will talk to the Lord about it and listen, the things that the Lord will speak, there's going to be some exposure based things. So he might talk to me about his heart for this old lady or other old ladies. I should say elderly. That's a much more respectful way to say it, but of an elderly lady. If an individual will talk to the Lord about it and listen, there's going to be some exposure that's just naturally done as God speaks calm and changes perspective. So there's going to be restructuring of thoughts that happen. But when there's that exposure, the amygdala, the part of our brain that is that kind of like that smoke alarm, but also attaches meaning to events and to places and people. There's therapeutic work that's done that's going to help me to be more calm and kind of undo the triggers. So that's one way is we talk to the Lord about reoccurring issues that cause triggers. And the second thing is that since calming myself is part of listening to God, listening in itself can be a resource when I'm triggered. So we might need some additional resources here. But if I'm out of the window of tolerance, if I make the goal, I need to go and be still and just listen to God's voice and hear his perspective. That's going to be something that is really helpful as well. And then listening daily is a mindfulness based activity, and it may help. I put the word increase there, but it might help, especially decrease the activation. And we talk about the resources like meditation that they just bring that baseline lower, and so I might be less likely to jump out of my window of tolerance as quickly. So that's how Christian listening skills can be useful as a specific tool in the window of tolerance. All right, so that's our video for today on how the window of tolerance can be helpful for work with Christian listening skills.